Thank you, Secretary of State. He's got to go now, but we might be seeing him later on. So all those hot questions that you wanted to ask Secretary of State, you can do so later. Let's move on and consider construction in infrastructure. If you think about infrastructure as needing the political will, of needing the finance, and needing the construction, then we're that construction part about how that can do that. And we've got a great cast of people here to talk about and give their views about how we can take the expertise that we've got in the UK and further help all our friends from across the world who are here at the moment seeing what's happening with the Olympics and get a broader view on how that can help. I want to just set the scene with a couple of points here. I'll come back to that in a minute. Regeneration. Regeneration is the powerhouse of growth. It's essential for a growth strategy. You can see there a picture of King's Cross, actually painted and St Pancras rather, station when it was first built. But actually it get into a fairly sorry state. And so we started looking at what building a high-speed railway and regenerating that area can do. And there's an artist's impression. But don't believe just artist's impressions, because actually there we are. That's what's going on now. That's from the webcam last night. You can see the construction that's going on. Sustainable cleanup and remediation. That's what you can see that used to be at Stratford. You've heard that a few times. That's what it used to look like. There's an artist's impression of what might be, but actually there's a photograph of just taken a week or so ago with the Olympic crowds walking through the redevelopment that's happened at Westfield and the shopping that's then there. So that's real, it happens, but it isn't just in London. Here you can see infrastructure as a catalyst. And this is stuff that's gone where we join countries together. So that's the Øresund Bridge. And there you can see that Malmo, which is a relatively small town across the water from Copenhagen, in the 1990s was an industrial city in decline. And that's from the people of Malmo saying that. That's not my opinion. They said that of themselves. With poor economic outlook and high unemployment, today Malmo is a multi-award winning and internationally recognized for its work on sustainable urban development. Right? So that's the sort of stuff. The point I'm trying to make is, whatever you say about all the analysis, none of those things would ever have happened if it hadn't been for the big investment in infrastructure that underpins it. And so let's go. We've had the Secretary of State. We've now got a cast on the table here before you of four people. We've got John Previck from Make Architects, one of the newest and most vibrant of British architects that we've got. Very rapidly started working overseas, internationally, with some fantastic projects. We've got Uwe Kruger, the CEO of Atkins, himself a technologist that is bringing a smart and clean thinking to construction with a fresh approach, I think. Howard Shipley, who's now Executive Director of Lang O'Rourke, one of our most innovative construction companies in the UK and working internationally. Previously, he can share some of the glow of the successful delivery of the Olympics with Director of Construction at the ODA. And last but not least, John Armitt, who is the chairman of the Olympic Development Authority, and he's a through and through constructor. Langs, Costains, HS1, Network Rail, the Olympics, I think it was in that order. And so with that, I'm going to ask each of them if they could say a few words, but I think if you can be thinking, how can we take that both to help you, our friends from overseas, but also you, the UK delegates, take this stunning track that we're living in now and make sure it also has a legacy for our international businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. The difficulty of following a Secretary of State or a Minister these days is that the civil servants have pinched all our best lines and given them to them. So apologies for any repetition, which you may get from me. Eric Pickles talked about the fact that, of course, this was a regeneration opportunity, and it's worth reminding ourselves that, and particularly our earlier discussion this morning, that one of the political drivers behind London bidding for the Games was, in fact, Ken Livingstone. And Ken very clearly said, I am not interested in sport, I'm not that sort of person. What I am interested in is regeneration. And for him, it was about taking this area in the East End of London at Stratford and having that regeneration opportunity that the Olympics the Olympic Park would provide. Taking this 2.5 square kilometres of, as has been said, heavily contaminated land which had been, in a sense, forgotten, very poor communications across it, communications on the outskirts of it, but nothing going across it. Some factories, some travellers, the only occupants, in fact, of the land, and as we discovered, travellers don't like travelling, so that was one of our first problems, was to persuade them to move on, and thank goodness for compulsory purchase powers. But the other thing about the political leadership, I think I've already mentioned this morning, was Parliament providing powers to the Olympic Delivery Authority to actually get on with the job. We were our own planning authority as well. There was a Chinese wall between those designing and those giving the planning approvals, but that planning power was absolutely critical, I think, to being able to get on with the job. We spent 2 years of planning. We then had a 4-year programme of construction, leaving ourselves with a year at the end of it to hand over to LOCOG so that LOCOG could carry out their trial events. From the very beginning, legacy was at the forefront of every decision we made. So it wasn't about how is this going to work for the Olympics, it was how is this going to work in legacy, as well as how do we make this work for the Olympics. And that drove the decision about whether to build a new venue, whether to use an existing venue, and clearly that's the cheapest option if you can do it. If you can't do that, then you've got to either build new or build temporary. And every time it was, well, will this work in the long term? If so, then we can build permanently. If it's not got a long-term benefit, then let's recognise that and just put up a temporary structure. And basketball and water polo would be classic examples of that. We went out and hired, and I remind you all that David Higgins kicked all of this off with Alison Nimmo, and they went out and got a mixture of people from private and public sector. Howard, an example of somebody from the private sector who was our construction director, and you'll hear from Howard in a moment in a bit more detail. We made a commitment to being very transparent about what we were doing, and I think this is an interesting issue in itself. That the more transparent you become about what progress you're making, how your budget is going, then in a sense the more pressure you put on yourself. I mean, in a sense you put the monkey on your back, but it does drive everybody in the team, because nobody wants to be the people who at the end of a quarter are going to be seen as being either behind programme with their particular elements of the project or in fact overspending. It was also an opportunity to make some sort of social changes and enhance people's skills. And as again, Minister said, we have in fact seen 10% of people coming out of unemployment, and we had 25% of the labour force coming from the local neighbourhood. The net result is the park, which we used to be able to excite people by this picture. Now, of course, they've been seeing it on television for the last 2 weeks, so it's becoming quite a common view, but clearly a transformed place, a place which, again, legacy so important. This is creating a new place in London. This is a place for future generations, not just for the Olympic Games. And that's why the parklands element of this was absolutely critical. We put a lot of money into the parklands. We spent a lot of money on the hard infrastructure of the gardens to ensure that, in fact, that will last and it isn't something which is going to deteriorate quickly. We put art into the park. We commissioned some actually relatively, I thought at the time, quite expensive bits of art. Art doesn't come cheap. But again, it raises the general tone of the park, and in fact, it adds that extra dimension rather than it just being bricks and mortar. The buildings, we've had some of the best architects in the world on this, and I think that's demonstrated by the quality of and the excitement of the buildings. I think in many ways the stadium is in some ways the most exciting, simply because it is a Meccano kit which has been designed to be put up and taken down if necessary, because we're not certain about the long-term use when we commissioned it. So we said to the designers, give us something which in fact we can dismantle back from an 80,000 seat stadium to a 25,000 one as an athletic stadium in the longer term. Having built it, of course, now nobody wants to take it down, and we're well into the competition at the moment to try and identify long-term operators, the decision having been made that the stadium will now stay in public ownership. We're not selling the stadium, it's going to stay in public ownership, so it's a bid now for who wants to rent it and operate it in the future. And of course there are a lot of events coming, and we've already won the 2017 World Athletics Championships on the basis that this stadium would be available in the long term. So what's the wider legacy? Well, clearly I think there's, as again has been said, the legacy of confidence, the confidence in ourselves to be able to tackle these sort of projects. Small businesses across the country responded to a survey we carried out in which they said, yes, we do feel more optimistic, we feel more confident, we've learnt things. We now feel confident about taking that forward in our businesses in the future. Clearly it's been great in the last 4 years to have this level of investment, and it's provided again jobs and opportunity during that period, but more importantly it creates, I think, a springboard in which we should now be able to say to both the British government about their ability to have confidence in the industry to deliver on future projects in the UK, and it should be giving us confidence as a sector to go out and talk to the rest of the world about what we've done. As I said earlier on, not preach about what we've done, but show our ability to be flexible, show our ability to take on these sort of challenges and work with people in their particular circumstances to help them create the solutions that they need in their cities and for their games or for their infrastructure around the world. And that's what I hope we will be able to achieve, but we have a narrow window of opportunity. The Australians did very well off the back of the Sydney Games. We've now got to make sure in this country that we take that opportunity over the next couple of years to really push overseas and to maximise the opportunity for British business. I'll stop at that point. Thank you.